All right, so good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's episode of I Know Right, Nature Matters. So, this evening, we will have a conversation on the principles of just recovery and the critical contribution of Indigenous knowledge and practices towards imagining a new world. So, hi, I'm Joolia, and I'm from Legal Rights and Natural Resources Center, and I'm from Friends of the Earth, Philippines. So, to introduce our speakers, we have minted sa ingid Alim Bandara, who is a Teduray leader and a member of Supreme Council of Chieftains of Timuay Justice and Governance. So, Piyu Buteng, MSI Alim.
Gutang, good evening sa lahat.
And of course, next we have Sam Cossar-Gilbert, who is the International Program Coordinator for Economic Justice and Resisting Neo-liberalism of the Friends of the Earth International. So before joining Friends of the Earth International, Sam worked in environmental and social justice movements for over a decade as a trade union organizer, trainer in citizen media, and an activist with Australian Student Environment Network. So good evening, Sam.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hello. And of course, last but not the least, our very own Maya Quirino, who is the Advocacy Coordinator of Legal Rights and Natural Resources Center or Friends of the Earth Philippines. So maayong gabi, Maya.
Hi, maayong gabi sa tanan.
So before we jump into our topic, we have a few reminders. If you want to join our conversation, you can type in your comments, questions in our Facebook Live. So we are now live on our Facebook, Legal Rights and Natural Resources Center. So, good to have everyone here tonight. As I can see, our panel come from different places. So, MSI Alim is in Maguindanao, Southern Philippines. And of course, Maya is in Metro Manila. And of course, Sam is in Australia. So, I just want to ask now, how are you? Kamusta kayong lahat? And how is the situation there? So, siguro pwede tayo mag-umpisa kay MSI Alim. So, kamusta po kayo?
Yes, magandang gabi. Sa ngayon okay naman, medyo ang panahon dito dahil may upcoming daw na bagyo. So parang medyo pasiuna na kaya medyo makulimlim at saka minsan umulan. Overall, okay naman maliban doon sa mga mabibigat na issue no, nakaharap sa malawak na bahagi ng aming ancestral domain. Pero at least at the moment, okay.
Oo nga po. Sige, pero mamaya no, mas papalalimin po natin kung ano yung mga conditions dyan sa Teduray Lambangian Ancestral Domain Claim. Pero narinig nga po namin no, na nag-gardening din kayo eh. No? So nagtatanim kayo ng sulagad nitong nakaraan. So very excited po kami na makita kung ano yung magiging kalabasan ng garden.
Okay.
Sige, so next. Sige pa.
Kayo.
Opo, sana makabisita talaga kami. We can visit your garden. Of course, next we go to Metro Manila, no? Maya, kamusta? How is it there, especially that the cases, no? Metro Manila is a center of cases in the Philippines.
Yeah, so we're back to stricter restrictions. So the movements have been restricted and the cases continue to rise. So it's quite concerning. And then the rate of the vaccination rollout is quite low. I think we're still at 1 million something vaccination. So long way to go for the vaccination. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. So we are in a prolonged lockdown. No, we have to find ways how to cope with the situation. How about there, Sam, no, in Australia? How are you?
Nakamute.
In terms of the COVID situation, since November, it's been quite good here. There's been zero community transition or very little transmission for 5 months, really. We've had a few snap lockdowns and there's been a few cases, and then the whole city's shut down a few times, but no, very limited COVID transmission, and the vaccination rollout is quite slow, but yeah.
Yes, and of course, now we heard in the headlines the series of bushfires, especially in Canberra, in Victoria, which tells us that climate crisis is really real, no? It's real to a lot of people. It's not a myth. So given this experiences that we have no, in the portal that we call COVID-19, it's very important for us to make sense of it. And in relation to our topic for today, of course, this evening we're going to talk about just recovery. So we hear it many times, especially when we talk about post-pandemic situation. But the real question is, what does it really mean? No? What is it? And why is it important to talk about it? Maybe we can start with Sam.
Yeah, so I think for Friends of the Earth International, we've developed some just recovery principles, and we acknowledge that the response to the pandemic is really going to play a big role in the political, social, economic outcomes for the next decade. So it's really important how we recover. And for us, recovery doesn't just mean going back to normal, but it's really a time to prioritize justice, sustainability, human rights, and the protection of livelihoods on the planet. And we think a just recovery is built on all of those things. So for us, yeah, the kind of 4 principles I wanted to talk about a bit today, and I can put a link in the chat, is really around economic justice and redistribution, internationalism, democracy, and system change. So for us, it doesn't mean going back to normal. We think we really had a lot of problems before COVID, and COVID's actually exacerbated a number of those problems. So we think we really need to abandon the neoliberal economic model of austerity, and we need to put in place measures on justice and recognising ecological limits. We think the government needs to play a big role in guaranteeing people's rights. And when we look at all of the recovery packages, they can't support just the fossil fuel industry. They really need to put Indigenous people's rights first, people of colour, migrants and working class people. So we need to see those policies coming out, and some governments are doing it and others are not. And when we look at the recovery packages, they really need to be supporting the jobs and livelihoods in the care sector, but also in new renewable energy technologies. So we can't. Another principle there is internationalism, and I think we see this in the vaccine rollout, that's not what's happening. So we need the recovery measures and the vaccine rollout to be built on enhanced multilateral cooperation and solidarity. So internationalism across borders to help build our collective response. And we need better international regulation to prioritise people's rights and the environment. And I think we've seen through the crisis that global debt of global southern countries has really increased. So debt relief, particularly the Friends of the Earth groups in Africa and Asia, have been demanding that. So, you know, some countries are paying more on debt relief than they can to COVID recovery. So we really need to drop the debt and ensure that the primacy of human rights. So if we had the third principle is democracy, and we know that a lot of authoritarian governments are using the kind of COVID crisis to beef up authoritarianism, to really clamp down, kind of using the health crisis as an excuse to harm environmental activists. And we really think democracy needs to be defended and strengthened through protecting people's rights and not criminalizing social movements. And then the last thing is the general Friends of the Earth system change principles that we have. We really need to, moving forward, think about living sustainably with our planet. And that means transforming our energy system from a fossil fuel corporate-based one that just benefits a few to a people-powered renewable energy system. It means transforming the way we look after our land and our environment from one that's destructive, that we know that a lot of viruses have come from the way that we treat animals and the destruction of the rainforest. So we need to really trust and give land back to Indigenous people for management and communities to manage it sustainably. We need to move away from industrial agriculture towards agroecology and sustainable food systems. And in terms of economic justice, we really need to transform the way our economy works and put it as an economy for people, not just for polluters and profit. So I'll stop there, but they're our kind of big picture items of the principles of a just recovery. And many of our member groups across the world are having this discussion, asking their governments for change and for a just recovery to COVID. It's a really important struggle, and linking the issues of kind of climate change and people's rights and just recovery is really crucial over the next few years. Thanks.
Yes. So thank you very much, Sam, for giving us in broader strokes what just recovery is and why we need to talk about it. So maybe we can ask next si MSI Alim, para sa inyo po sa hanay ng mga katutubo, ano po ba yung nakikita ninyo na isang makatarungang recovery, lalo na sa sitwasyon natin ngayon sa pandemya? Ano po yung nakikita ng mga katutubong komunidad?
Yes, good afternoon ulit sa lahat. Brief background nang pumutok itong COVID-19, our health experts at saka mga tribal spiritual leaders nagsagawa ng ritual or tulak in April of 2019 at nagkaroon ng briefing patungkol dito sa usapin ng COVID-19 na mayroong malapit na kahalintulad doon sa naging karanasan once upon a time ng mga Teduray sa sakit na tinawag nilang dulet. So yun, maraming similarity, may mga rights up na ginawa kami patungkol doon sa explanation ng mga health experts at spiritual leaders namin. Ang nakita na pinaka-urgent, yung parang pag-fine-tune doon sa possible disconnect between yung tao at kalikasan. Yun yung nakikita. Sapagkat before, halimbawa, may mga similar diseases nitong COVID-19 or dulet, malaking tulong para sa mga katutubo na gawin nilang parang refugee site yung mga kagubatan, bundok, mga ilog, And then at the moment, dahil nga sira na ito, parang hindi na siya agad makasagot doon sa pangangailangan. Because during those days, yung nakikita namin ngayon na social distancing, ang nangyayari sa atin ngayon is individual. Kami noon is parang families. Halimbawa, yung buong pamilya parang temporary alis doon sa kanyang tahanan and then temporary stay in with nature. Ang tawag namin doon ay dumalas. So yun, mag-rest din yung tahanan natin and then siyempre yung mga mamamayan, members of the family, magkaroon din ng parang refresh yung kanilang kalusugan. Siyempre, kasama doon yung mga pagkain can be found, So ito yung naging karanasan na ginagawa during sa panahon na magkaroon ng similar cases. So, sa ngayon, medyo pahirapan, hindi talaga makasagot. For example, yung food gathering, pwedeng sagot doon sa ating kalikasan. Ngayon, nagiging dependent ang mga tao doon sa ayuda, na kung saan napakalaking problema. Although overall, kung titingnan natin, yung new normal na lumabas dahil dito sa dulet o COVID-19, hindi naman talaga bago for the indigenous peoples, lalong-lalo na sa mga Teduray. Lalo na kung titingnan natin doon sa anggulo ng rasa, yung pagsakripisyo, kahirapan, sapagkat talagang mas lalong nahihirapan. Actually, kung titingnan natin, even without COVID, yung mga ini-introduce na mga polisya for the, specifically sa amin, talagang nag-create yun ng rasay. Lalong-lalo na yung kasiraan ng ating kalikasan, kung saan highly dependent yung ating mga tao. Sa ngayon, yun nga, dahil nasira sila, malaking problema, no? Ang mga tinitingnan sana na parang immediate na halimbawa hindi na talaga kailangan ang special na pag nung tawag dito yung healing, no? Sapagkat kapag nagkaroon ng anong tawag doon, yung temporary stay in with nature, no, makarecover sila, no? And then pagbalik nila sa kanilang tahanan, siyempre parang na-re-energize sila, and then kasama dito yung mga rituals na ginagawa, no? Parang pag-gather ng mga medicinal plants, and then yung spiritual aspect. So combination ng response doon sa mga ganitong pandemya. So yan, medyo magandang balita sapagkat halimbawa, okay, sa mga Teduray at Lambangian, wala namang nagiging kaso na yung mga sa lokal, wala kaming na-encounter, no? May mga ilang cases ng COVID victims from our group, pero yung galing sa labas, no, pagpasok sa aming mga area, kaya nabalita rin siguro noon na may mga may case ng suicide ata, no? Dahil doon sa pag-isolate, akala ng tao na positive siya, yun pala yung halimbawa 14 days na quarantine. So mga ganon na karanasan, and then talagang parang bago para sa mga katubo, nagka-create ito ng problema. So more or less, ito, ang nakikita, ang sabi naman ng mga spiritual leaders namin, huwag tayong masyadong mabahala, provided na nandyan tayo sa ating mga komunidad. No, sapagkat yun na nga, parang kasama din sila sa pagsasabi na ang sakit na ito ay galing sa labas, at kapag maingat tayo sa loob ng ating mga komunidad, hindi tayo dapat mabahala sapagkat hindi naman yan parang nagmumula lang sa ating immediate na environment, no? So yun yung mga nagiging karanasan sa aming itong past mahigit na isang taon, no, na nagiging problema. Actually, mas nagiging problema pa ng mga tao yung lahat ng mga protocols na sinasabi natin, no, nagbigay talaga ng mga bagong problema. Halimbawa, yung mga pagpupulong nagiging online, and then kahit yung pamimili, no, sa ngayon, no, talagang totally bago. Nahirapan na katutubo yung gano'n na online marketing, online forum, meeting tulad nito, no. Maliban doon sa problema sa gadget, no. Although parang gusto rin namin alaliman sapagkat noong panahon mayroong sinasabi yung mga elders na there will be time na yung communication is through parang yung sa hangin na dinadaan. So baka ito na rin. Parang na-force na rin sila na may aabot na panahon na ang pag-usap ay idadaan sa hangin, no? Ang tawag nila doon parang puti daw na hangin, no? May colorless na ng hangin. Pero yun yung termino na ginagamit na doon daw idadaan yung conversation. So parang may mga tinitingnan na ang gulo na baka ito na yung foresee or parang nakikita noon pa ng mga matatanda. More or less, ganun lang. No? And then, regarding doon sa bagamat, malaki na ang kasiraan sa ating mga environment, talagang sinisikap, no, ng mga mamamayan, lalong-lalo na yung mahigpit na humawak sa tinatawag namin sulagad. No? Sapagkat ito yung sagot doon sa mga bagong ayuda system na dapat nandiyan lang sa kapaligiran natin. More or less, parang gano'n lang muna siguro ang mga nakikita namin na mga responses ng community. At yun nga, ang pinakamalaking pantarin, pinakamalaking response din yung pagsasaayos natin sa ating kalikasan kung saan napakalaking mga kasiraan ang nangyayari at tuloy-tuloy na mangyayari sa kasalukuyan, no, with the use of chemicals in the farming system. So, ito lang muna siguro, maliban kung may mga katanungan along the way.
Opo. Yung nakuha ko nga po, no, sa sinabi niyo po na napakahalaga ng ancestral domain, lalo na sa recovery. At yung usapin ng indigenous knowledge systems and practices, no, hindi lang iisa yung paraan, no, na dapat natin i-address yung ating sitwasyon ngayon sa pandemya, yung pandemic situation. Actually, nasagot na ni Emsa yung sunod kong tanong kung ano yung situation ng community sa ngayon. Pero siguro, ano ko yung sunod kong tanong kay Maya. I wanna ask Maya, given these community situation and experiences, do you see this as related to decision making at the national level? And if so, how do these shape and impact them?
Yeah, definitely. What MSI Alim has shared to us, these are all because of national policy. So Sam already mentioned principles of just recovery, and the inverse of that is that we have the pandemic has not really changed the way that the government responds to issues. So in fact, what we've seen months after the pandemic struck is that the government has actually intensified what it used to do before. So it has not really pivoted to recovery. Rather, it has intensified what it used to do before. So, for example, you look at policies on mining. And mining is very important to indigenous peoples because, as you know, most of our mineral deposits can be found in ancestral domains. So it's very important for indigenous peoples. So in mining, for example, the government was very quick to say that it would pursue mining as an economic recovery strategy. So this was just a few months when the pandemic struck. And in fact, today, just today, the government issued an executive order, so executive order number 130, and this has lifted the moratorium on new minerals activities. So so what it said a few months ago, it delivered on that promise. And again, you can see that the government is not really embracing principles of just recovery, but the same developmentalist and productivist paradigms that it believes in. So the problems that MSI Alim has brought up, this will continue because of the paradigm that the government believes in. So more extractives projects, more industrial agriculture projects, less of what MSI Alim has mentioned about agroecology and the principle of biocentric egalitarianism, where people and nature, animals, etc., are equal. So the government does not believe in that. So it will be the same, anthropocentric regard for nature, which is really, you can exploit nature, you can exploit minerals, you can exploit lands for profit and to grow the economy, so-called. So none of these just recovery principles are unfortunately filtering through the government right now. And so I think the work of civil society is the work is really cut out for us. We need to step up our game so that these principles are embraced by the government. Thank you.
Kumbaga, kung nakikita natin, it's not just about contracting the virus, no, the effects of national policies or international policies that does exclude a lot of voices from the communities, no. This next question I want to ask Sam, no. Of course, we say that we sail different boats, but we face the same storm, no. And then we have different challenges from different parts of the world. So we face, for example, inaccessible healthcare, social services, no, disrupted food systems. And from MSI Alim, he said that this situation is not actually new to the indigenous peoples. It's actually exacerbated even more. So from your perspective in the international and global level, no, what do you think are driving this storm that we are confronting, no, worldwide? You are muted, Sam.
Sorry about that. I was trying to keep quiet while other people were speaking. I think one of the drivers is that we have an economic system that's based on profit, based on a very small amount of people owning the vast majority of the resources, and that's called neoliberalism. And we've had also neoliberal capitalism, and we've also had an ideology, a very radical part of that ideology push that says that, you know, there's no role for the government to regulate businesses. That'll just harm economic growth. There's no role for the community. You know, the community doesn't really exist. It's all just a bunch of individuals. And that ideology has really been a driving force of much of the negative change that we see around the world. And there's obviously many people not living like that, resisting that, living in community. There's many incredible state-run health systems around the world, or public transit, or agroecology, local communities, and all of them, I guess, are in resistance to that system. So we see basically a system run for profit of the few, and that the exploitation of nature is one of the key drivers of the storm that we face. You know, there will be Australian mining companies digging up much of the Philippines, again for profit. There'll be other companies, you know, exploiting people and human rights violations, making sure people get the least amount of money possible. And again, it's that kind of profit at all costs motive, and that disrespect for our humanity and our values. And I think also the kind of other system is that real patriarchal, male-dominated system that sees a group of mainly men and white men benefit from that exploitation. So if you look at there's a number of different systemic factors where a small group of people have been able to exploit their power. But also there's incredible stories of people all throughout history resisting. And I think, you know, Indigenous people in Australia getting access to land and fighting back. There's trade unions where people come together collectively and take action to win their rights. And history is full of as many horrible stories there's as many inspiring ones of people getting together and winning change.
So what I get from this is that it's larger than what we actually think. No, it's not just about health crisis. It's so much more. And we talk about systems. We talk about structures that reinforces inequality, and it's very much highlighted, no, amid this pandemic. One of the things that's been said, no, about this pandemic, which MSI Alim and of course Sam and Maya has already told us that there's this supposed to have started because of our disruption of nature, no? We human beings have tilted the balance. Balikan ko, no, yung isang article ni MSI Alim. Iko-quote ko po, no, yung I remember your article po na you said COVID-19 is symptomatic of this kind of relationship that we have with nature. Nakwento na ni MSI Alim kanina. But gusto ko po malaman, MSI, kung ano po ba ito, no? Ano ba yung kind of relationship na mayroon tayo sa kalikasan, at bakit maaaring link ito sa karanasan natin ngayon sa pandemic?
Hello. Bali, traditionally kasi, parang ang pinaka nagiging problema halimbawa sa pagkasiraan ng kalikasan yung gamit ng may term kami doon sa write-up, yung grantong sinduratan. May relasyon siguro doon sa binanggit ni Sam, no, yung ano yun, capitalism. So, parang ganon. Yun yung talagang nag-create ng malaking kasiraan, no? Na yung relasyon natin sa environment, halimbawa, kasi during those days, every time na may gawain ang mga kapitubo, may ginagawa na parang permission, no, para masira man ito, pero at least may minimal, and then nasa kaisipan na kaagad kung paano yung recovery ng damage. So yun yung pinaka-, and then ngayon damage yung nangyayari at walang paano mo parang i-heal, no, walang paano gamutin yung nagiging problema. So ito yung nakikita, no, doon sa traditional na pananaw. And then kung i-relate natin sa ngayon, yung profit na binanggit kanina ni Sam, malaking problema yan for the indigenous people sapagkat yun nga, bago sa kanila, that is why sa ngayon hirap na magpasok sa business yung mga kapitubo sapagkat parang nagiging problema yung pag yung makaipon ng yung mag-isip sana na magkaroon ng profit, magkaroon ng parang every move dapat may gain, na wala iyon. At nakikita na itong ganitong mga practices, practically sisirain niya yung system na noon pa parang sinusunod ng mga community, hindi on individual basis, kundi nagsimula sa family, clan, at saka yung buong teritoryo. Kapag may kasiraan sa system na ito, yun na yung malaking problema na ngayon it is difficult. Although, halimbawa, yung konsepto ng ancestral domain, pero nanganganib pa rin yung ancestral domain kapag yung attitude toward sa paggamit ng mga natural resources ay hindi sang-ayon doon sa traditional practices. No? Kapag mapasok pa rin doon sa, minsan ang ginagamit na termino sa community, commercial system, talagang sira siya. No? Kasi halimbawa, isang maliit na bagay, yung understanding, halimbawa, kung makakita ang non-IT ng malaking troso, ano ang nasa isip niya? Kung profit yung iniisip, ilang board feet kaya ito? No, pero sa mga kapitubo, anong mga spirit, yung mga sagoyong ang nandito. Yun yung pinaka-purpose kung bakit pangalagaan yung relasyon nun. And then, in the absence of that, pangangalaga sa relasyon ito, talagang magkaroon ng malaking damage. No? Nagiging usapan din sa community. Paano? Dahil talagang lumalaki yung population. Yun yung talaga crisis pa rin yun, no? Paano tayo maka-response dun sa pangangailangan kung kakaunti ang resources and then marami yung consumidores, ang tawag ba doon, yung gumagamit. So, these are the things na tinitingnan ng mga kapitubo on ancestral domain wide. No? Kaya nga, nangyay ko kanina, hindi siya individual, hindi siya isang pamilya lang, pwedeng clan, at saka yung buong tribu. So kapag ganon sana ang response, no, baka makita pa natin yung holistic, hindi yung masyadong highly competitive at saka iba pang ang tawag matibay. So yun yung dyan, parang nag-address this practices talagang. Yeah. Ang term siguro doon, manganganib yung buong teritoryo na madamage. So, sa tribu na perspective, wala pang bagong parang response response na kailangan maliban doon sa pag
We just lost MSI Alim, I think. But as we wait for MSI Alim, there are questions. Okay. Hi, MSI.
naputol. Sa signal siguro nag okay. Balik na.
Sige po, continue po.
Fluctuate siguro yung signal ko.
Yes.
Sige po, tuloy.
Sige po. Tuloy lang po dun sa sinabi niyo po, no, yung sa usapin na kapag tiningnan yung mga forest at yung kalikasan as profit, no, ito ay talagang hindi maganda yung nagiging kalalabasan at maraming problema ang nararanasan natin. So pero specific po MSI Alim, no. Ako po curious po, syempre. Ano po ba yung mga specific na issues na kinaharap ng mga katutubo, no, na naghantong tayo sa ganitong sitwasyon? Ayun po. Baka may mga ma-share po kayo na ano po ba yung nag-experience, for example, sa Teduray and Lambangian?
Parang lahat yung aspeto ng buhay, yung economic, political, sa iba pang aspeto na kuan siya doon, no? Parang dapat titingnan ng maayos sapagkat yun nga, kung magkaiba ang pananaw, siyempre magre-react. Yun yung ngayon, no? Halimbawa, kung mag-react doon sa malakihang magiging masama yung pagtutid. So, yun yung mga usapin na napakahirap. Yun nga, balikan po, although napakaganda na sana yung response ng Estado for the Indigenous Peoples to yung ituloy yung ancestral domain, pero ano naman yung programa yung sa pagpaunlad sa ancestral domain, no? Halimbawa, mayroong activity, pero minsan ang tawag yan, yung magtutulak pa rin doon sa gustong mangyari sa ancestral domain highly commercialized. So, yun actually magiging problema yung mga katutubo. No? Ang ancestral domain, kapag isaayos na, halimbawa, yung natural resources na hindi lubus-lubusin na ubusin, no? Ma-damage, and then ang magiging kawawa yung hinahanap ng paraan kapag mabigyan yung power and control, kumbaga, ng ating problema sa ngayon. May ang talumin, pero yung kamay ng mga katutubo, masisira pa rin yung kanila teritoryo. At kung ano yung pinakagusto nilang mangyari, mahirapan sila paano abutin, no? Pero siyempre sa ilang mga IT communities na mayroong yung tinatawag ngayon na IPS, yung Indigenous Political Structure, dito sana mag-take off yung genuine na pagkaunlad batay doon sa konsepto, paniwala at pananaw ng mga katutubo. Kapag ang Estado mismo susuportahan niya ito. So, yun yung mga nakikita na parang mga challenges, no? Andyan yung problema, and then mayroong mga pananaw from yung punto de vista from the indigenous peoples, and then pahirapan yung realization nito. Sapagkat ang gustong mangyari sa mga bagong development framework, halos i-take out, no, from the ancestral domain, yung resources at itapon sa labas, gagamitin sa labas. Hindi naman siguro yun ibig sabihin na ayaw ng mga tutubo na mag-share. No? So ito yung mga nakikita natin na mga challenges sa usaping ancestral domain. Andyan na, medyo maganda na yung mga sa policy level kapag ma-realize itong ma-turn over yung control and power dun sa mga katutubo, sa tingin ko magiging successful. Pero kapag kahit na may title pa, yung KsK, pero yung control at saka mga operation ng usaping pangkaunlaran ay hindi pa rin hawak ng mga katutubo. Parang kwan pa rin. No? Mahila pa rin sila doon sa mainstream na mga pananaw sa kaunlaran.
Opo. What I get from this po, no, na there are different perspectives of
Yan
looking.
lang muna.
Opo. So what I get from this is that there are different perspectives on looking at nature. No, what on one hand, some see nature as profit, as money. No, and for example, for Indigenous people, like for example, the community of MSI Alim, they see nature as an extension of their body, something that you take care of. No, it's not something that you own. So I think it's also important, no, because of course the mainstream development framework would always look at resources as something that is can be converted into money, and that's why it's important to get the voice of the Indigenous people. So I'm looking actually at the comment section. So Joseph actually said that Timuay Alim raised an important point about the role of technology in the COVID pandemic era and the new realities. So how should progressive groups push just recovery efforts that would ensure that technology supports people's needs and address social and economic inequality rather than concentrate wealth further in the hands of the few, thereby worsening the divide? So actually transitioning to the next question, no, I want to ask three of you that given the situation, the issues, etc., no, what are your proposals really for recovery, and how do we make it just? I think Sam already gave us a head start, but maybe you can continue, no, and deepen more on that proposal.
There's Maya. Did you want to go first, or I just spoke? Or I'm happy to go.
Yeah, go ahead, Sam. No problem.
Yeah, I think there are policies at all different levels, and we see public finance as really important. So public finance for the sort of things I said before, renewable energy, not coal bailouts. And governments will be making, governments make choices all the time, but they'll be making really important choices with the just recovery. And so putting in place broad frameworks based on principles is important, what we spoke about. So, you have the principles that guide the action, but then things down to the really nitty-gritty local level. So I know in where I'm from, in St Kilda, the local government has a bit of just recovery plan and some planning for more parks. So during COVID, people were only able to go within 5 kilometre radius, and there's been a lot more parks and bike lanes. But other countries, the vaccine rollout is going to be a really crucial part of the COVID just recovery. And just this month, we're going to see some very important proposals in the World Trade Organization. So there's a proposal by India and South Africa to basically waive intellectual property rights over the vaccines, so that governments can make compulsory licenses to mass produce cheaply the vaccine for their people. But that's unfortunately being stopped by a number of governments, including the EU and Australia. So that's a really important kind of global level policy for the just recovery, because we know the first step of the just recovery is getting a hold on the virus. So yeah, I'd really encourage people to look at that campaign. It's called the TRIPS waiver, and it's really going to be, we're producing a few media articles on it, but also to look at it this week and over the coming weeks. It's a really big and important debate in the just recovery, because we're hearing signs that, you know, rather than a just recovery, we could have a vaccine apartheid that makes it very difficult for many countries around the world to have access to the vaccine till even 2023. And so and again, it's one of those key, when you talk about the principles of this issue, it should the big pharmaceutical companies be able to make billions and billions of dollars of profit off the vaccines, or should they be accessible to everyone in a just and equitable manner so we can all recover? So I think that policy at the global level is one that we're looking at. And then from the national level, I think Maya gave a good example. Are we going to focus on a mining-led recovery, or here in Australia they want to make a gas-led recovery, or will it be a people-centered, a care economy? Are we going to be supporting, you know, care workers, Indigenous people, not just the fossil fuel executives? So I think, yeah, it's public finance, it's policy at the local, the national, and the international level, and all of those levels are really important, and different Friends of the Earth groups are active at all those levels.
All right. So actually, no, I wanna ask this again also with Maya, no, because I'm very curious. How should it look like in the Philippines, no, when we say just recovery? So yeah.
Okay. So just recovery is essentially, as what Sam mentioned, it's really system change. Therefore, it involves so many things. It involves so many policies. So I'll just concentrate on a few that I think are very critical for Indigenous peoples. So what is really worrying for me is that I think the government is failing to make a connection between pandemics, pathogens, and exploitation of nature, encroaching into wild refugia. It's really disconcerting, because I think it is the central lesson from the pandemic that when you are encroaching on nature, you know, the more that we encroach into nature, the more that we're releasing these pathogens upon humanity. But I don't know why such a basic insight has not really trickled down to government. So I think it's very important for the government to make that realization first, that very basic realization first. When you look at policies, I would like to focus, for example, on our economic recovery packages. The government has already passed two, and there's another one. When you analyze those packages, you see that there is an overwhelming concentration on infrastructure. So the Philippine government has a build program, an infrastructure program, and in those two bills, surprisingly, they are a main feature. So again, if you look at economic recovery, shouldn't social amelioration, for example, figure so much more? Shouldn't vaccination figure so much more? Things like that. The third bill that's in Congress filed now, it's more promising because it has items there on supporting agricultural livelihoods and Indigenous people's livelihoods. So I hope that with that third bill, I think the government can articulate something more of a just recovery and not the same business as usual responses such as infrastructure. Another important thing that the government can really seize with the pandemic is the Department of Energy has released a statement that it's going to have a moratorium on coal, and this took us by surprise. But this is a very welcome development because finally the government is going to ramp up its renewable energy work. But we are worried that this track might just be used by the government to sustain the same, development and productivist paradigm. So even if you have a new technology and a clean source of energy, for example, but you're not really going to change, for example, your manufacturing, you're not going to change your national grid system, etc. So I hope that with this government's change in terms of energy policy, that it would also reimagine its development pathway, its development paradigm, so that with renewable energy, for example, maybe the government can try supporting community-led, energy sovereignty models of energy. So not the national grid, but off-grid types of energy. Maybe the government can do that. And that's really important for indigenous peoples because right now, some indigenous peoples have already been displaced, for example, by solar farms. So can't you see it's the irony of it? You're trying to install new energy, but at the same time, you're trampling down on indigenous people's rights. So when you're doing these kinds of new technology, new innovation, they should be paired with respecting and promoting the rights of peoples. So I think also I've spoken about policy. I also want to touch on individual responses. No, I would like people to have also a change of hearts. Our own citizens. Maybe this pandemic can also be a lesson for them. Can be instructive also, and they can. I mean, everyone I think loves nature. We all love nature, right? But I think there should be a shift now. We should have an informed love of nature. We should really know what it is about. And for example, if you're very curious, if you love nature, you can be very curious about it. And then you can make probably the connections between zoonotic diseases and extractives and plantations, things like that. And if you love nature, you can ask questions about why mining is destructive, things like that. So I hope in public consciousness, there's also a shift. We deepen our understanding and our knowledge and our appreciation of the role of nature in our lives, so that we are not co-opted by just the capitalist logic of just producing and exploiting and accumulating, etc. We should turn to indigenous knowledge and practices, such as what MSI Alim has mentioned, that maybe there's just this level of having enough, and that will suffice, and that will be okay for everyone. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Maya. So actually, we also have another comment, from John Matthew Vinuya. So he said that, in my opinion, there's likely a method with which we can earn profit and conserve environment by borrowing only an enough amount of natural resources to produce just enough goods for the needs of the population. However, this is likely difficult to become a reality because of corporate greed being proliferated by capitalism. So we also talk about system change, as what Maya and Sam has mentioned. Of course, so now, we can see that, of course, there are a lot of proposals for recovery, and it's important to unlearn the things that we are accustomed, especially when we are in this system where we see everything as a commodity. So we are now actually in that last question, and of course we want to end on a good note. So we always want to be hopeful so that we can regain more energy to take more action, because Maya has already said that there's a role, individually, and as what MSI have mentioned, that collectively, we can actually make change. So I want to ask a question to three of you. In this situation, what gives you hope? Maybe anyone can start, but maybe MSI Alim?
Or Sam. I think Sam is leaving at 7.
Maybe Sam.
Yeah, I think just seeing how in some circumstances, I mean, in Australia, I think people have really come together to solve the crisis, and you see these really incredible both individual acts. I think, Maya, what you said there, of solidarity, of coming together, of people cooking meals for one another, of people looking after each other, that people thought was not possible before. And also, I think how social movements have responded. Just this weekend, there was the Just Recovery gathering with over 10,000 participants. But also online actions and online protests, and just the real creativity in innovation, which people are continue to demand change. And yeah, how we're connected here now, speaking on this panel. I think the innovation in which people are trying to address the problem and coming together is really exciting and inspiring to see. So thanks so much for having me. I have to leave quite soon, but it's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And for MSI Alim, no, ano po ba yung nagbibigay pag-asa sa inyo, no, given ganito yung sitwasyon?
Yes, very briefly, para sa akin, nakikita ko yung internal for the Indigenous people community, no, paano palakasin yung kanilang IKSK sa economic aspect, political, at saka yung sa peace and security. Kasi yun yung pinaka-nainit na issue sa ngayon. So, andyan pa rin yan. Kung paano yan ma-strengthen, malaking pag-asa yun, malaking and sa Estado, sa part ng Estado, napakarami yung mga batas, no? Yung naisagawa, kaya lang yung sa implementasyon medyo parang mabagal o hindi ganon ka kung ano ang nakalagay sa batas, hindi ganon yung actual implementation. So, yun. And then, tulad nung binanggit ni Maya, baka may mga additional legislation pa rin para ma-empower yung IT community na gamit yung kanilang IKSK. Hindi yung parang i-approve sila. So, andyan yung relasyon na yan. No? Kung palakasin yan, yan yung malaking pag-asa for the Indigenous people. Lalong-lalo na yung sa pinakamainit na. Kasi sa ngayon yung conflict management, may mga system available sa mga Indigenous people. Kaya lang, hindi gaano rin ito parang nagagamit, no? Mas umiiral yung ibang mga paraan na mag-create ng more problema doon sa loob ng mga komunidad. So yun yung nakikita ko. Kapag maisaayos ito, parang ibigay sa katutubo yung kanilang pamamahala sa mga isyung ito doon sa level nila, sa tingin ko malaking panyo, no? Kasi ang isang problema minsan sa mainstream, parang ang tingin nila dahil kawawa ito lang anong tawag dyan, traditional, baka hindi angkop sa gustong mangyari. So hindi naman siguro ganun. Yun, isaayos lang ito sapagkat andyan yung pagkilala. Kapag maisaayos ito doon sa actual implementation, tingin ko malaking pag-asa yun for sa buong komunidad, hindi lang po dahil.
Maraming salamat po, MSI Alim. How about you, Maya? No?
I'll keep it short. I'll keep it short. I think it's young people like Joolia that give me hope. You know, look at the Milk Tea Alliance, the young people in Taiwan, Hong Kong, Myanmar, Thailand, and the Philippines fighting on, you know, not listening to reason even because they believe in something. I think that really gives me hope. Thank you.
Wow. So that really hyped me up. So I really learned a lot in this conversation. But sadly, no, we have to end this episode. But of course, no, our conversation does not end with just an episode. Of course, we have to continue it both online and more importantly, offline. So on behalf of LRC team, of course, thank you very much to our guests, Alim Bandara, Sam, and of course our own Maya, and our lovely audience. So do join us next time in the next episodes of I Know Right, Nature Matters. So once again, thank you for joining us and good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.